Bravo. Thank you, David, and welcome, ViVO students. So happy to see your faces, and so happy that you can join us today. We have a few more kids joining as we speak, and we are so excited to have with us two amazing musicians today, Andrew Gonazalez and David Belkovski. There they are, and they will be sharing with us some wonderful, beautiful music and some interesting, slightly unusual instruments. So both Michael and I are super excited about that. And I'm gonna also turn it over to Michael to say a few words and introduce our guests.
All right, thank you, Clara. Hello, everybody. I hear my own voice echoing somewhere, and that's okay. So good, yes. Now, what I am so excited, there are many reasons why I'm so excited to have our guests today. One being that, first of all, I want us to imagine, for those of us who have had guest artists before at ViVO, imagine that David and Andrew are with us here in Sonoma, that we're all maybe gathered around outside in the courtyard, or I guess you can't be outside, that's probably either of those instruments. But in this case, I want us to, as we listen to this music and to the sounds of these instruments, I want you to gather up some questions and hold them in your mind for the right time. There will be definitely times where I want us to ask questions of our guests here about the things that they brought to share with us. It's such a unique opportunity to have these people with us here. So it's, I want us to take full advantage. So don't be shy. Ask anything that you're wondering as we go. That's pretty much my message for you. But all right, so who would like to begin?
So thank you all for having us today. I'm so glad to meet all the students, and I know that what Andrew and I are going to present, it's not something you see every day. I think we are very lucky to get to play the instruments that we do. I'm going to present on the harpsichord. I don't know if there are students out there who are familiar with the instrument. Maybe all of you have heard about it. Maybe some of you have seen one, and hopefully someone has played one. But if not, I'll be demonstrating what you heard a little bit of right when you came into the chat. And Andrew can talk a little bit about his instrument of choice. It's the violoncello de spalla. And he'll show and demonstrate a lot for you. But before any of that, I'd love to just go over sort of why we got into historical instruments. The instruments that we show you today, they're not what you'll find in a modern orchestra. If you go to your local orchestra, it's very unlikely that you'll see these instruments because they were not what the instruments that we have today are not exactly the ones that composers like Bach and Mozart had in their day. So we'd love to show you what we're so passionate about and care so much about.
Great. So do you want us to introduce ourselves or a little bit more, or how do we want to do this? Do you want to present first and then I'll talk, or?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to just kind of, why did you get into the violoncello de spalla? And sort of, you can explain your background as a violist a little bit.
Sure, great, cool, that's awesome. So my name's Andrew Gonazalez. I am originally from Virginia. I'm based in Philadelphia, but like David, I lived in New York City, probably longer than David. For 10 years I was living in New York City, and then I recently during the pandemic joined a string quartet called the Jasper String Quartet, and they're based in Philadelphia. So before I had that job, I was at the Juilliard School like David, I was there for 6 years. I did my undergrad and my master's, and I always had two really big hobbies, not hobbies, things that I was really passionate in, which was viola, which is my main instrument. And I really enjoyed historical performance and early music. And what that meant for me at the time was basically playing music in a style that maybe that the composers would have sort of leaned towards, or basically educating myself with the style of music. And so I had this one desire to be a chamber musician, and this other desire to play Baroque music or historically informed music. And so I went to a lot of chamber music festivals, and you know, one was in Menlo. I did a chamber music festival there, which is probably not too far from you all. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that I found a festival called the Valley of the Moon Music Festival that combined both my interest in early music and chamber music. So I went there with the help of my girlfriend's a violinist, a Baroque violinist, and David and Rachel know each other really well. They have a group together called Dioscuri, and she basically convinced me to continue to pursue this historical music thing that I just didn't have any access. I didn't feel like I had too much access to. I did take Baroque violin lessons in college, but other than that, I hadn't had too much of a way in until she had kind of given me sort of a way into. So I went to this festival called Valley of the Moon, which is why we are all here. We are both here, and basically that festival is pretty amazing because I was very drawn to the chamber music repertoire of like Haydn and Brahms and Beethoven, and to me that gave me more of a kind of way to latch on to historical practice, because I felt like Baroque music was really hard for me to like translate from early music to like my modern kind of style. But like when I was able to play chamber music in an early music style with like forte piano or like with gut strings, it just basically opened my eyes to a new sort of possibility. So I think maybe David, you can talk a little bit about yourself, and then I'll go into my next section.
Good. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. So my name is David Belkovski. I'm mostly these days I play all kinds of historic keyboards. When I say historic keyboards, I'm talking about keyboards before the piano. So the piano that you see every day, that big black instrument, is not part of the repertoire of Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, and so on. All of those composers had a smaller instrument. It was likely more colorful, and some of them even had an instrument called the harpsichord. So I got into this stuff, this world of historically informed performance practice. What a terrible term. There's so much going on there. But all it means is that Andrew and I, we really want to play music, hopefully in a way that sounds similar to the way Bach did, or similar to the way Mozart did. So we study texts from their time. We study books that they wrote about how to play music. We study scores, music that they had with different fingerings and different instruments entirely. Sometimes that they won't even write for piano on their score. They'll write for harpsichord. So it made me think, oh my gosh, there's a world out there that I don't know about. And when I was in college 4 years ago or so, I started to play a little bit with what was the kind of, maybe you've heard of it as the grandfather or the predecessor to the piano, called the forte piano. Before that big black instrument that you see all in every concert, there were these smaller instruments made entirely of wood and strings. There was no metal that you see on a modern piano. So they were much quieter, but they were much more responsive. What you played, you got. What you put into the instrument, you got back. There wasn't a lot of mechanical things inside the piano. So I thought that was incredible. It was so eye-opening for me to play this music on those old instruments and feel like the music made more sense, like it spoke more clearly to me. And I just thought it was really interesting. I'm also a big nerd, and I love to study historical things. I like to read history, and I like to read about those instruments. I don't know if anyone out there enjoys history, but I'd be happy to talk about really any moment in history if you'd like at some point. But that's why I was so drawn to these historical instruments. I felt like I was a part of a tradition that that kind of went away, that we lost a little bit. So I could revive, I could revisit the music of Bach in a more fresh way for me. And it's kind of strange. We play old music in an old way, but it's new to our ears today. So we hear it as if it's new. But the other incredible thing about playing harpsichord, and the reason that I ended up going to the historical performance program at Juilliard, where Andrew also studied. He wasn't in the same program, but he studied with a lot of the same people. And the reason I went was one of the most exciting things for me as a keyboard player. I don't know who plays piano out there, but one of the most exciting things about me as a keyboard player is that when I play historical stuff, I get to improvise all the time. I get to play basically, if I want to, like someone who plays jazz, but I get to do it in classical music. So when I'm playing with an ensemble, whether I'm playing with my friends or if I'm playing solo music, I can improvise almost as much as I want to. And I'm getting better and better at it, but I wasn't allowed to do that very much when I played modern Brahms or when I played Shostakovich. It was sort of not part of the accepted style. So I was really excited by the fact that I felt like I could be creative more than just playing what was on the page. I could make more notes than there even were than there were on the in the score. So both of those things really drew me. I ended up going into this historical performance program, and I haven't looked back. I take all of the stuff that I learned in historical performance on the harpsichord, and when I play the modern piano now, when I play big Steinways or Faziolis or all these big instruments, I apply all of the things that I learned. I try to use the improvisation, the touch, the articulation, the sound, all of that is in my ear now, and I try to apply that to my modern playing as well. And I find it really exciting. So does anyone have a question out there? I don't know how best to open the floor, but if someone wants to raise their hand or ask a question before we start.
I think Nitai has a question.
Okay, please.
Hi, I have a question. Before the piano you started playing, like what other like can you name some like other instruments before the piano?
Sure, yeah, so this one is one of them. If you think about the way the modern piano looks today, the way that when you go on stage and see a big instrument, that one in that form only came around late in Brahms' life. So 1875 or so. That's the way that we understand that piano. Before that, we had a million kind of pianos. They were called forte pianos. We just use that term, but we can call it a forte piano. And they were smaller and bigger depending on the culture. So in England, they had slightly bigger forte pianos. In Germany, they had slightly smaller ones. And then before that, when Bach was alive, the main instrument, when Mozart even was born, the main instrument was this harpsichord. And I'm going to go into greater detail about why this is different than the piano. I see you, Renee. I can't wait to hear your question. So before we go into that, there was also, and still is, the organ, the clavichord. All of these instruments were equally important 200, 300, 400 years ago, but they don't have the same importance today. The organ we still use, the clavichord, which is kind of like the piano. I'll explain that later. It's kind of like the piano. We don't use it anymore today, even though Bach, it was his favorite instrument. He said it was his favorite instrument, and we don't play it at all today. So I think there's something really exciting about all of the possibilities that used to exist, but no longer get performed as regularly. So those are some of the instruments. There's the harpsichord, the clavichord, the forte piano in its many, many, many shapes and sizes. All of that came before the modern piano. Renee? Hello?
Renee, are you there? Oh, we almost got Renee's question. All right, we'll hang tight if he comes back.
Sure, no problem, no problem. Should we go ahead then? I don't know if anyone else has a question, but
those were our questions for right now. But that's a reminder for the group. If any of you have a question, just raise your digital blue hand, and we'll see it right here, and then we'll come to you during the question and answer period. Okay.
I think as we start playing a little bit, we'll probably find people asking more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
go ahead, Andrew. You can start your
Okay.
question.
Great. So, I always say this is my main instrument, but I do play several other instruments. I also play the guitar. I play this instrument called the viola da spalla, which I'll show you in a minute. But I really got into music playing the viola. I started on the instrument in the 5th grade. So I was 10 years old. And I had the choice between 3 instruments, the violin, viola, and the cello. I had no idea what the viola was. And my brother played the violin, but he hated the instrument and never practiced, so he sounded very scratchy. And so I had assumed that that's what the violin sounded like. So I didn't want to play that. And I knew that a cello was really big and that it wasn't going to fit on the school bus. So I picked this instrument, and I'm really glad I did, because it is a really beautiful sound that's sort of in the middle between a violin and viola. So violin would be for a violinist, but viola is a little bit lower. And I really like how the sound is between a kind of like a baritone singer and like a tenor and alto. And so I got more interested in the viola plays the Bach cello suites, because we have the same strings as the cello, but it's an octave higher. And I always loved playing Bach or any Baroque music, basically. But I kind of felt, especially with the Bach cello suites, I'm sure you guys know this one. That is the prelude for the first suite. I always felt like something was missing, and later I kind of found that I was being drawn more to like a deeper sound, which was sort of the world that it was definitely the world that the Bach kind of intended it to be. So I started researching ways to make a deeper sound, and so I even like tuned my instrument down like a half step. Back then there wasn't a specific pitch. It went all the way from like, was it like 392 or something, David, or to like 460 or whatever, which is the difference between pretty much like a whole entire step. So and in different parts of Europe had different A's. Even across the street, someone might have a different A than someone else. And it wasn't really until like, what do you want to say, like even like the last 50 years or 60 years that the A has been like a certain pitch now, you know, because of orchestras and such. But so I continued to play, you know, Bach in like a modern context. I really love, you know, Itzhak Perlman and Pinchas Zuckerman's Bach double violin concerto, and I always was sort of wanting to play Bach very musically and beautifully. And I'm gonna try to play Bach right now in a way that's like, I don't know anything about early music, so I'm gonna play it very like what it would be considered modern, and it's beautiful. But I think I want it by the end of this for you to be able to tell like the difference between the two things, and why someone like me or David might be interested in pursuing a different approach to it. So this is a modern bow, which everyone has. It kind of curves like this. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm going to take out some other bows and other instruments in a minute. So here's Bach before I got interested in early music. I'll just play like the first maybe minute of this. All right, so that was my attempt to play it very modern and macho-y, but the thing is, I kind of got tired of playing Bach in that style, especially when I started listening to the chords and hearing, getting a little bit more educated about the strings that they were using. For one thing, back then, they didn't use steel strings like we have today, synthetic strings. They used what's called gut strings, which is literally like a cat or sheep gut that was wound a certain way and made this really beautiful sound. Kind of like what David was saying about the forte piano. You kind of put in what you get. You get what you pretty much put in the sound. So that is one difference. Another big difference is there's just like the piano, there's 100 different types of kind of piano models, forte piano models. There's also many different types of bows. And this is what's called a Baroque bow. And if you notice, the modern bow kind of has this like curve that goes in that sort of makes it very efficient for you to basically play as long and sustained as you want. But whereas the Baroque bow, if you can see, has this kind of arch like this. And I got very interested in this idea of like creating a line in music based off of like literally the physical limitations of the bow. So as you see, as if you make a down bow, the sound, it gets a little bit less and less. So there's a decay in the sound. So I started getting really obsessed with the Baroque bow, and I'm trying to make this, I guess I could talk about this all day, but summarize it. Maybe I can just summarize it in the playing. So basically, I started listening to the way the bow responded to my hands, and I started educating myself and doing a lot of reading about different ornaments, and I don't mean ornaments like on a Christmas tree. I mean ornaments like just adding extra notes to things to make it sound more embellished and stuff. So I am going to play a little bit of the same piece, but with the Baroque bow, so you can hear the difference. And I might add a few little ornaments in there too. All right. Can you guys hear a difference? Yes or no? Yep. It might be a little bit harder to tell on, yeah. But anyway, so I was really excited about that, but you know, I'm always sort of hungry for getting even closer to the way Bach might have intended to hear it. So that was the 6th cello suite by Bach. And the cool thing about this piece, all of the Bach wrote 6 cello suites, and we know that the very last cello suite was written for a what is called maybe a piccolo cello, or an instrument that basically was written for 5 strings. And as you can see, I'm limited because I have only 4 on the viola. So I started looking up ways I could play even closer to the way that Bach might have written this piece. And I found this instrument called the violoncello da spalla, which is basically a mini cello / ginormous viola. And what's great about this instrument is that it's an octave lower, so in the cello range. And let me play. It's kind of confusing at first because you think it's going to sound higher pitch, but then it's like this really deep instrument. So this is the A string, D, G, C. So really deep like that. And then in addition, it has an E string like the violin. So it's like a violin that's an octave lower plus a viola that's like an octave lower. And the cool thing about this piece is now I can play in the exact register that Bach intended for this piece to be played in, with the exact fingerings and everything. So in a way, it's a lot easier. So I'm going to play the full movement of this, which is the gavotte from the 6th cello suite. All right, here we go. Let me just tune it real quick. I forgot to add that there's a strap that I put that basically holds it up, so it's kind of like a guitar kind of thing. Here we go. I'm gonna step back a little bit. And then it repeats.
Yay!
Woo!
Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Let's see. Shuffling spotlights here.
So do we want to do a little bit of questions before we hand it over to David, or do you want to go straight into more music?
Now, I want to see, if you don't, I'd love to know what Renee's question was. If Renee still has a question, let's check on Renee here. Here we go. Piano. Well, we'll come back and we'll find out what that question was. But no, thank you for stopping to check. Good. I think there are probably some more sounds that you wanted to share with us. David, did you want to play? Oh, sorry that you're muted. Here, let me fix this here. There we go.
I'm also muted. David, you're muted. You're not muted anymore.
Okay.
Well, I'll go over what makes the harpsichord unique and why it works the way that it does. First thing I'm going to do is remove the stand so people can get a better look inside. One of the most interesting things about harpsichords when they were around is how many kings, queens, emperors had them in their courts where they lived. So it meant that these were really valuable pieces of furniture. They were also musical instruments, but they were pieces of furniture. So they were beautiful. As you can see, I'm going to shuffle this around a little bit. This one is blue with gold trim, and it has that shiny gold leaf here. You can see how the inside is even shinier than normal yellow. It's kind of because it's gold leaf. Not actual gold, but it's supposed to look like it. You see that it has two keyboards. I'll explain what those do in a second. But some of them, like this one here, had paintings inside. So we're going to move this over. As you can see, this harpsichord has a gorgeous painting inside of it. This was really normal for high quality instruments that you would find in, let's say, the King of England, his court, or maybe a duke in Italy. They would have really fancy instruments with beautiful paintings inside, probably done by some famous painter. And the whole point was to show people how fancy you were. Look, I own this fancy instrument. I had a fancy painter paint a fancy painting inside of it, and I make my musicians play music for me. So luckily, we have a lot of instruments that survive today. These ones are copies of original instruments. So these are new copies done in the last 20 years or so of instruments from 400 years ago. I find that to be really cool. So one of the ways that the harpsichord works differently than the piano, as I'm sure people are somewhat aware, the piano works by pressing a key, and then on the inside, a hammer, what we call a hammer, that's covered in felt or cotton, shoots up and hits the string. So it goes like that. When I press down on this side, at the beginning of the key, it shoots up the other side with a lot of extra machinery inside, but shoots up and hits the string. The harpsichord does not work that way. Instead of a hammer, can everyone see this? It has what's called a jack. So this whole thing is called a jack. You'll find one jack for every single string under this. I'll pull it out in a second. But if you look closely, there is inside that jack a little piece of plastic. Does everyone see that little piece of plastic right here? See how it's kind of blurry. What if I do this? Oh, there we go. You see that piece of plastic? Okay, great. So that little piece of plastic, when I press the key this time, it's not a hammer. What happens instead, the jack goes up and it plucks the string. So that pluck is why we named the little piece of plastic a plectrum. And a lot of the time, plectrum from the older instruments were made from goose feathers. So the little pieces of plastic here in old instruments were of goose feathers, goose quills. So the inside of a feather, you have a long piece of quill. That's what was used to make that little plastic. When I press the key, the jack goes up, and you'll see it in a second, and it plucks the string. So inside, if I remove this, it's much simpler than a piano, so I can take it apart whenever I want. You'll see all of these 3 rows here pluck 3 rows of strings. So the lower keyboard, if you can see there are 2 keyboards, the lower one, you can see how something came out here, plucks 1 set of the strings. If you were a little bit closer, you'd be able to see there are 3 different sets of strings. All of them get plucked by 1 jack each. So remember, the jacks are those little wooden things. So that lower, what are called keyboards or manuals, this lower manual plucks that string. If I pluck the string with this keyboard, the upper manual, it sounds a little bit more, like, say, nasally. So do you hear how the quality is a little different? So a different key came up versus they have slightly, you'd hear it a little bit better in person, but they have a slightly different quality because they pluck the string at a different point. The one that I played that's on the upper manual plucks the string closer to me, and the one on the lower manual plucks the string farther away. I can play them if I want to at the same time by shoving this upper manual forward, what's called coupling them, making them play coupled, and you get to hear them both louder, so it's twice as loud. And see how both of them came up? Actually, a third one came up as well. That third one is currently out of tune, so I won't play it, but is a what's called a 4-foot set of strings. So I'm not going to go into all that detail, but all that means is all of those strings, I'm going to play one without any of the other ones. Even though I'm playing an octave lower, it sounds an octave higher. So I can play that high if I want to. And I can play just I don't actually have that top string, but you hear how high that is? And that's because, I don't actually know if that's coming through on your end, but that's because it's playing a string that's supposed to be half the length of the other strings. So that 4-foot means it's playing 1 octave higher, even though I'm playing what should be 1 octave lower. A lot of crazy stuff, a lot of cool math goes into all of this, but the awesome thing, I'm just going to make sure this gets back on, okay? Just a second. Sorry, this isn't quite back on. Bear with me. This one is annoyingly difficult to get back on. There we go. So the cool thing is, not only do I get to play the strings like that, with the kind of pure sound, without any kind of noise in the way, there's also this little line of red felt. Can everyone see the red felt? If I push that red felt over using this little knob here, all of these things are controlled with little levers and pushing. If I push that felt over, it makes the instrument sound like a lute. A lute is a similar instrument to the guitar. So it sounds like I'm plucking a guitar almost. If you can hear the way this works. it's really pretty, and it creates a very magical effect in the middle of a concert if I decide to play with the lute or the buff stop. That's another way to say it, the buff stop. That is more or less how the harpsichord works, and I have as many resources for musicality as I would on a piano, except for loud and soft dynamics. I can play big, and you see how all of the notes are going down? I can play a little more quietly. And based on what the registration is, what keyboards I decide to play with, what things I decide to activate, like the 4-foot if I want it, or only 1/8 versus 2/8. These are also called eighths. These are a lot of terms I'm throwing around, but depending on what I use, I can basically make my own dynamics and what I like to call colors, because I think all of these are different colors. So that is more or less how the harpsichord works. Obviously, its advantage is that you can create a lot of percussive sound. You can create a lot of sound that sounds like a drum. So when I play with an ensemble, when I play with a lot of my friends, I can create a lot more noise than a piano does. A piano hits with cotton, the hammer is hit with cotton, but this plucks metal strings. So you can create something that's very beautiful and lyrical, like I played up there. But I can also create big noise like, and that kind of range of color, that I keep using that word, but this is what it is, that color is very unique to this instrument. And Bach took advantage of it all the time. He composed almost all of his music for some kind of keyboard like this. So I'm going to play a little bit of an Allemande by Bach that's very, very pretty. But before I do, are there any questions that I can answer? Renee, do you have anything you want to say? No? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play if there aren't questions. Just a little bit of an Allemande by Bach. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.
Bravo.
And,
Thank you so much.
yeah, of course. If there are any questions, either from the students or from either of you, we'd be happy to answer them.
Now I had, something after, let's see, I'll spotlight myself too so they can see all of us talking here. Something I found really fascinating about, I've never even gotten to look at the sort of the, all the options you have as to where the string is plucked on a harpsichord. I find that really fascinating. And there's a direct correlation to all of our string players here at ViVO. When we are playing pizzicato, if we pluck closer to our bridge, you do get that brighter, a little bit thinner, more like narrow sound. And if you pluck far away from your bridge, you do get that rounder, little bluer, or you get a different sound color. And whereas if we shorten our string, you change your pitch, but if you just change your pluck, you change the color. I find that so fascinating. So if any of you are at home with your violins, try plucking one of your major scales really close to your bridge and listen for that brightness, and then try plucking super far away from your bridge up over the fingerboard, and you'll hear that total difference, and you'll be a little harpsichord of your own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we should invite the students to raise their hands on Zoom with questions. So I have questions, but I would like to allow the students to ask their questions. So please, if you raise because you cannot unmute yourself without us giving you permission. So please give us that little sign if you have a question so that we can unmute you and you can ask a question.
Is there a chat? Can people write in the chat as well?
Usually,
People that may not be comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we usually don't have a chat enabled for these meetings, but I'm not seeing any hands right now. But Renee, do you have a question, Renee? You were raising your hand before. Can you?
No,
no question. Okay. Let's see.
Something I'd love to do just for the students who want to see a little closer look into the instrument. Usually after a concert, when there's something they're unfamiliar with, the audience likes to come up and get really, really close. And I'd love for the students to get as close as possible. So I'm just going to unplug my iPad from the stand and bring it as close as possible to both harpsichords so that everyone can just get a closer, more slow-paced look instead of this.
That's awesome. And Andrew too, I'd invite you, if you'd like to show your instruments up close, because they're so beautiful too. We can kind of this is like a viewing moment. That'd be really awesome.
Please.
I'll make a little more room.
Here's the up close and personal 5 strings. I like how you can actually see the string vibrate so much easier. And the back of the instrument.
Beautiful.
Too. So.
I love that. That's just so beautiful.
I have a question, Andrew, about your instrument. So because for me, I have to admit that this is the first time I'm hearing anyone to play violoncello spalla. So it's fascinating, both in terms of what it looks like and what it sounds like, and it's beautiful. And so tell us a little bit about your instrument, I guess. How did you obtain that, or where does one even find an instrument like that?
Right, so there's a guy who I heard a recording. His name is Sergei Malov. He's this European guy who's like, I think a little bit older than me, but he recorded one of the piece that I had played, the entire suite, and like it's on YouTube. And this was about like 6 years before I ended up getting one. So eventually I got the courage to try to find a way to purchase one. But the guy who makes them in Europe, although they're really great, they're super expensive. And like, ideally I could not really afford that one. So I started contacting different people that might be interested in a project like this. So I contacted this guy out of Georgia named Don Rickert, who's kind of specialized, I guess he specializes in these instruments now, but before he was really popular there for making folk instruments, specifically from like medieval and Baroque period. He made these instruments called like pochettes, which are like these tiny little violins that a lot of like people would take on travel with them. And they're really cool. And a bunch of other different kind of random instruments that someone like me who's like super nerdy about all these instruments would get excited about. So obviously he was really excited about this idea of making something like this. And I sort of got some pictures of kind of what the guy Badiarov in Europe, like his violas, spallas look like. And he went, and then this guy named Badiarov was teaching a class on like how to make these instruments. So he took a course on the guy who made my instrument took one of his classes online, and before he ended up making one for me, and I'm really happy with it. And I've gotten a lot of work done on it since. Like I'm in the process of getting a new bridge made for it. I just got a new sound post on it to basically make it more louder and more efficient. And I added finally found some strings that are made for this instrument. So it's a lot more efficient and louder.
Very cool.
It sounds really beautiful.
It sounds beautiful, and it sounds like it's entirely custom made for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. It's been, when I first got it, I was like kind of unhappy with, like, I definitely had to make some adjustments to it, but now I think it sounds the best it sounded so far. So
That's great. And I have also a similar question for David with the harpsichord. So you have two in your room where you are right now. So is it like, guitar players have different kinds of guitars and they use them for performing different pieces and such? Do you is that how you use your harpsichords? Or tell us a little bit maybe about the difference or similarities between the two and why you have more than one.
Yeah, I wish I could say they're mine. I lucked into a very, very fortunate roommate situation. She happens to own two beautiful, beautiful instruments. These are more or less from the same or inspired by the same time. They are both what are copies of instruments by the maker Dulkin in his workshop, Flemish maker. And the one that's with the painting has, it features, I think it's best for slightly later repertoire, so something around 1700 to 1770. This one that I played on, probably something like 1670 to 1725, but it's so irrelevant because ultimately our ears still recognize them as very similar sounds. Some instruments are strikingly different. I think I think in order to play music by Italian composers, I don't know if you can see me. I think my video might be off.
Yeah, we can see you. No.
Yeah, it's working.
You can see me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
In order to play, let's say, music from Italy, the Italian harpsichords are remarkably different. None of them had two manuals. They were longer. They had a different body. What the body is this part, this very long part that's not part of the keyboard. That's the body. They had a very long and differently shaped body. So not only that, but there were harpsichords that didn't look like this. They were what were called virginals. So they were much smaller. They were more like rectangles instead of these triangle harp-like things. There were muselars, which are kind of like virginals, but they're plucked at a different point. Utterly gorgeous. Those were mostly in in England and also Italy, but all of them cater to different repertoires. They sound best when you play repertoire made. However, they still sound great with really anything meant for a plucked instrument, or even a clavichord, sometimes an organ too. It's a very flexible instrument, and I don't think it gets enough credit for its flexibility. But yeah, that's the gist. I can show the kind of innards if people want to see the. So here's the really fancy one. You can see the painting inside has one part that looks like this, and that probably wasn't. I shouldn't have done that, but yeah, there we go. You can see this kind of rustic shepherd and shepherdess, and you can see the little instruments being played. The painting is probably representative of something from like 1800 or so. So that happened all the time. Harpsichords would have paintings or have different features from different ages. They were constantly being retouched and repurposed. You can see there's even more artwork inside. It gets really pretty. There's right at what the equivalent of our
beautiful
sound. Yeah, you have a lot of beautiful work done inside. So it also has a lot of the same features. You see these little knobs. This one is by Garrett and Clayson, made in the UK, in the United Kingdom. This one has white keys, which are also common. It has all the same features, except maybe a little bit more developed. And then this one is a little more simple, but it's also very beautiful. The deep blue and the gold leaf, very personal, depending on what the owner wants, whether it was an original instrument or not. This was, again, it was like a piece of art for their room. Much like you would have a painting by someone you admire, you might have artwork or a harpsichord done by someone you like or whose work you appreciate. One last thing, you can see even the legs on this instrument are different. So it gets held up, there's no pedals, but the legs are on what is called like a trestle, I guess. And then there's only, so it can come off, this whole body could come right off. And you can see inside how there's 3 different sets of strings. So there's the one that's controlled by these pins. This is how you tune them. I tune these pins for the 4-foot. Then I tune one set here and another set here. All of them are different sets of strings. If you look closely, there's 3 for each note. There's 3 different strings. So it's 3 strings like the piano, but they get played in completely different ways. So yeah.
Very cool.
There we go.
Thank you.
Right, I'm bringing back spotlights so that we can properly thank you. ViVO students, I'd love for us to unmute and give our guests a quick round of applause. You're going to see a request to unmute. Please give our guests a round of applause.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Maybe in another 10 years, David, we'll see a bunch of spalla and harpsichord players around the Sonoma area. That's our goal.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to have you, and like truly special that we can offer this to our students in Sonoma while we are all still in isolation here in California. And we hope that we will have an opportunity to see you again at some point with your instruments. And yeah, all our best to you for the holidays and for your careers. I guess one last thing that I would like to ask you maybe as you leave is just to tell us, what are you working on kind of professionally right now? How are you spending your time musically these days?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. So my main gig is I'm in a string quartet, and so this whole year we've basically been doing a lot of recordings. Like we're making like some CDs and basically pre-recorded performances. A lot of live stream stuff. But we also are in residence at Temple University for their prep program. So we teach high school students on Saturdays. That's been online. So I can teach over here in Seattle, students in Philadelphia, which has been nice. And basically also I've been doing some performing here on spalla and viola. So I just did a recital here in Seattle in October, pre-recorded one, which is still available online. So I can give you information on that.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in hearing.
Yeah. No, please share that with us. And also, like, how can we follow you if you have any live streams to tune into? So that would be wonderful.
Yeah, do let us know.
Sure. Yeah.
How about you,
David's
David?
been busy too.
Yeah, mostly teaching, and so I have a couple of private students, but I'm also teaching different courses on improvisation and sort of how people used to learn music. I'm teaching music as it used to be taught almost, and those are, I did one private course, and then now I'll be teaching one through Juilliard's evening division. But other than that, little collaborations here and there. I've done several collaborations with a San Francisco, the Orchestra Philharmonia Baroque. And yeah, I little things with colleagues here, little performances, but as it is a pandemic, I'm trying to make my efforts go toward the learning and setting myself up for the future. So I'm doing a lot of improvisation and trying to build skills that once I leave, I can either showcase or teach. And I think it's an invaluable, hopefully a skill for the future in classical music.
Great, that sounds great. Thank you. Michael?
Good. I'm just so happy that you were able to come share. I hope you don't need me to tell you what I'm doing in my career. We're here.
No, I didn't mean that, but you can share if you want to.
No, just wanted to say thank you again. That's all. That's all.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to coming back. Hopefully in different capacities. Maybe we can arrange a masterclass of some sort, or more exposure to different instruments. We have 2 other laureates that would love to be a part of this as well. Yeah, but this was a lovely experience. Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up for this.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you all.
We really appreciate that.